Welcome to Rebecca Sounds Reveille. Today's show is really exciting because it's very unique with the guest that I have for you. And what I want to bring to you is something so unique that you're going to want to pay special attention. Do you remember a time where you have thought about someone who might have performed a one-man show? Well, have you thought about someone recently who has done that? Well, I want to bring to you today someone who is doing just that. In fact, this person will be performing a one-man show as well, going from Portland to Santa Barbara, Phoenix to Sedona, Santa Fe, Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago, Cleveland, Philadelphia, and well, maybe even others. We're going to find out more about what he's got going doing that. But he's really committed to the values of a saint that has a love for all, and so does he. In fact, is one who is in support of certain needs, which we're going to find out more about today. And along the way, my guest will feed the homeless and invite them to a performance of his talents that he brings to share the love that he has so much of to give. Oh gosh, this is so exciting. I just don't even want to share. I want him to bring his inspiration. But he's also a New York Times best-selling author, as well as his artistry is so unique. He's going to share some of that on the show today. But he's an author of 16 books. Yes, 16, including the Moses Code, Emissary of Light. And he's recorded more than 18 music albums. And he's going to share a little bit of those talents with us as well. And I'm going to bring him on the show because what he has to share, the passion within that is going to just illuminate from him to you. So without any further ado, welcome to the show, Dr. James Twyman.
Hello, wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me on the program.
I am delighted because what you have is something that is going to really be of so much value to so many people. Not only are they going to be able to be inspired with what you have to share with us today, but once you go on the road, because what you're going to do is do it penniless. Can you tell us a little bit about what you have going
Sure.
on?
Well, St. Francis is going to Broadway, St. Francis of Assisi, through this one-man performance that I've created of the life of St. Francis. We're taking the show to Broadway next year. It'll be in New York for 2 weeks from February 20th to March 1st. And as you mentioned, along the way, I'll be doing a tour from the West Coast to the East Coast, all the cities you mentioned, where I, along with my friend Bill Free, will be traveling, doing the performance in different churches and convents and many different places. And we'll be traveling as close to how St. Francis himself would have traveled 800 years ago, which means no money, in complete dependence, not even knowing how we're getting from city to city or where we're sleeping or how we're eating, but knowing that everything will be provided because we're going to be in this divine flow. And how could you not want to feed St. Francis? In fact, what I'll be doing the entire tour, much as a method actor enters into the role and the character they're playing completely. Take, for example, Daniel Day-Lewis. He's one of the great method actors. For example, when he played Lincoln in Spielberg's film, for 8 or 9 months, however long they shot that film, he never left character. Every night, his wife slept with Abraham Lincoln, not Daniel Day-Lewis. And I even heard that when they finished shooting, it took him about 3 days to get his Irish accent back. That's how deeply he would go into the character. So I'll be doing the same thing with Francis from the very beginning, diving into that character, becoming him the whole tour, and almost like an experiment to see what will happen. if I let Francis himself completely overshadow me. And so this tour, it actually came about because of a new book I have that just came out called Giovanni and the Camino of St. Francis. I've loved St. Francis my whole life, and I was a Franciscan when I was younger, and it's one of those hooks that gets into you and never lets go. Once a Franciscan, always a Franciscan, they say.
So
And I had been playing with, I'm sorry, go ahead.
go ahead and finish your thought there, and then I'll ask you my question.
I was just going to say that I've been playing with this idea for Giovanni for so long, and finally I sat down and wrote this novel, and I didn't know how to share about a novel on a book tour, and that's when the idea came to write this one-man musical and actually to give people an experience of who Francis was. So I've been doing it for 9 months maybe, but this tour going across the country all the way to Broadway, I think is going to be quite exceptional and inspirational for me and hopefully many others.
I think it is as well. For those who may not understand how deep your character is or what the character consists of, who this man, this saint is, can you tell the audience a little bit about
Sure.
Francis?
Well, St. Francis of Assisi lived in the 13th century, and he is the most beloved of all the Christian saints. People love and honor him from almost every religion and spiritual background because he was universal. He was the first interreligious peacemaker. He had this connection with nature and with the poor that was unparalleled at that time. He actually was one of the richest, brattiest kids in Assisi when he was younger. He had everything. His father was a rich cloth merchant. And then at that time, there were always wars and battles going on with even the city next door. And for Assisi, that meant Perugia. And Assisi did battle with Perugia, and he was captured and put into prison for a year. And that's when he began to question everything. He became very ill in prison. And the life that he had been leading seemed very empty. He began to search for deeper meaning. And slowly his heart began to open to such a degree that he left everything behind. He literally stripped naked in front of the whole town, laid his clothes at his father's feet, and walked out of Assisi to lead a different life. And then he began living with the people that he was once so afraid of, which were the lepers. And though he was very ridiculed at the beginning, people began to be so inspired by him that people followed him, women, men, and the Franciscan order was born. And still today, there are probably 1 million Franciscans around the world. But it all began with the simple decision of this little man to see if it was possible to do what Jesus said, to really live the gospel. And I think he proved that it is possible. And the interesting thing is, today, 800 years later, his life and his example, I think, are as important as it was way back in the 13th century, because we find ourselves at a very critical time. Francis's life was at the very end of what we now call the Dark Ages, but the light and the energy that he brought was a major initiating factor of what we now call the Renaissance. He was one of the great inspirations of the artists and the poets of that time. And I think today we live in a very similar time because we are in a bit of a dark age. But I believe that if there are enough of us who commit ourselves as he did, we could be at the cusp of a new renaissance. In fact, I'll tell you one more thing that inspired this musical. It was a quote that I heard that I had never heard before from a very unlikely source. I'll tell you what the quote was and see if you can guess who said this. It's a bit paraphrased, but basically he said, "The revolution we started failed. It created more atrocities than it solved. What we really needed were 10 St. Francis of Assisi's." Who do you think would have said something like that?
That I don't
Your
know.
clue is that it was in the 20th century. A lot of
Oh,
people
wow.
think Gandhi or maybe Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would be a good guess, or John
Mother
Lennon.
Teresa.
Well, Mother Teresa, it seems like something they would say. Vladimir Lenin said that. The architect of the Russian Revolution, who was an atheist,
Very interesting.
recognized, yeah, he recognized that what's really needed is a small group of totally dedicated people like Francis, and that's what will change the world. You know, to people like us who give everything or are 100% committed. So when I heard that, I said, okay, I'll be number 10. Who are the other 9? And I think that this tour, as we travel across the country, is an invitation for those other 9 to step forward and to say, I'm willing to be a St. Francis for this time. I'm willing to be 100% committed now, as he was then. And let's see if the world can change from the influence of a small group of dedicated people.
It's interesting you say this. So do you think while you are traveling that you will end up having a small group that will sort of
Maybe.
travel with you?
Who knows? We don't know what's going to happen, and that's part of the fun. That's why we decided to keep this so open, where we wouldn't even know how we're getting from place to place. I wouldn't be surprised if there are others who say, I'm with you. Let's go. It's
So
sort of like Forrest Gump.
okay, so that's what I'm thinking. You're going to start your journey, and I'm wondering how this is going to transpire, because this isn't on Broadway. You're going to have musical instruments. You're going to
Really,
be
just one musical instrument. My little Venezuelan cuatro is the only instrument that I'll be bringing, because we're going to keep it very simple.
okay. So you've got your guitar. You're going to have water, because that's an
Yeah,
essential
we'll have water. Sure.
necessity. So you're going to have a backpack with you
Mm-hmm.
and a good pair of shoes and
Not,
probably a hat.
not even a good pair of shoes. And in fact, most of the way I'll be barefoot.
Okay, so tell me, give me a visual here, because this is a visual show, but we also have a platform that is auditory. So we want to give the audience who's listening without, and also those who don't have sight, an opportunity to sort of be able to visualize how this is going to take place, because this is a
Mm-hmm.
big feat you're taking on. No pun intended,
Yeah.
but pun intended.
Yeah. Well, as you said, we'll be starting in Portland, Oregon. And when I do the first show on January 4th, I'll be stepping into the character of St. Francis. And we have a special costume that's being made. And I step into that character, and will remain in that character all the way through New York. So in other words, I'll be thinking like St. Francis, reacting as St. Francis. Of course, I'm not going to be telling people I'm doing this. I'm not going to say, nice to meet you, I'm St. Francis. I'll still be James Francis, which is what I go by. But in my mind, in my heart, I'm going to let that presence overshadow me. And when we do the show in Portland, our next event will be all the way down in Santa Barbara. How will we get there? I don't know. There are a few guidelines. Number one, we can't accept any money from anyone. So people can't give us money, but they can buy us a bus ticket if they want. They could buy us a
Okay.
train ticket, but we can't fly. So we can either walk, hitchhike, get a ride, get a bus ticket, or get a train ticket in order to get from place to place. But none of it will be planned ahead of time.
This is exciting. And the other thing to think about is the weather, because there will be inclement weather during the time that you are traveling.
Yeah, it will. I don't know why I decided to do this in winter, only because it makes it more of a challenge.
Yes.
It's already challenging. But, I just trust the process.
Yes, this is
There,
a faith. All
there
by
are going to
faith.
be angels all along the way who are going to be helping us and supporting this. And I think it's just as much for them as it is for us, that when we realize, just like the prayer of St. Francis says, it is in giving that we receive. It is in loving that we are loved, when we realize that and we give to another, we're really the ones who are receiving, because there's really only one of us here. So maybe sharing the prayer of St. Francis in music would be a good idea, since we brought that up, and give people an actual feeling for what this music is going to be and what the musical is going to be like.
Absolutely.
That sound good?
Absolutely.
All right. So the interesting thing is that Francis himself did not write the prayer of St. Francis. Most people don't know that. They just assume, but it does seem to capture him, who he was and what was most important, which is to be an instrument of peace. Oh Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, bring your love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, your faith. And where there is despair, bring your hope. Where there is darkness, bring your light. And where there is sadness, your joy. Oh, divine Master, grant that we may not seek to be consoled as to console. To be understood as to understand. To be loved as to love. Make me your instrument, beloved. For it is in giving that we receive, in pardoning that we are pardoned, and in dying to ourselves that we live. Oh Lord, make me an instrument of your peace, of your peace.
That is so beautiful.
Thank you.
That is so beautiful.
Such a beautiful prayer, isn't it?
It
And
is.
I think that's why everyone wants it to be the prayer of St. Francis, because it does seem to capture his life and the way he lived in harmony with the people around him in nature. And he did the things that people were afraid to do. I'll give you one example. This is the 800th anniversary of this particular event, actually. There was at one point when the leader of the Crusades, which were going on at this time, his name was the Sultan al-Kamil of Egypt, had said that he would give a Byzantine gold coin to any Muslim that brought him the head of a Christian. That's how dangerous it was. And when Francis heard this, he said, I'm going. That's where I need to be. That's who I need to meet. And of course, everyone told him that he was crazy and that he would be tortured and killed. And he said, it doesn't matter. I need to at least try. So he and one of his brothers, Brother Illuminato, had made 3 different attempts to travel into the Muslim territory. Once they were shipwrecked, a couple of other things happened. And finally, on the 3rd time, he made it. And of course, they were immediately captured and tortured and sentenced to die. And there they were in prison, singing and celebrating. And the Sultan couldn't understand this, so he decided to make sport with Francis and give him an audience. And no one knows exactly what happened in that audience, but what we do know is that the Sultan was so impressed with him and so impressed with his dedication that he not only let Francis and Illuminato live, but let them travel throughout the whole Islamic territory preaching the gospel. And when I first started my own ministry, people began calling me the Peace Troubadour because I was responding to that story, him being the first religious peacemaker. And there was something that happened in 1986 because of that example. Pope John Paul II, in October of maybe it was November of 86, he called the leaders of all the different religions together in Assisi, the home of St. Francis, not to discuss or talk, but to simply pray, the peace prayer from each of their traditions. So the Dalai Lama came for the Buddhists and all the different leaders, the Muslim leader, all of them came to Assisi. And a friend of mine was there and brought those peace prayers back. And when I was giving them, I had this remarkable experience where in 1 hour, I put all 12 of them to music. That was 25 years ago. And that's when I began traveling around the world as the Peace Troubadour, at first just wanting to imitate Francis, to be a penniless troubadour and to just share these prayers. And then I began getting invited to countries at war or conflict. For example, Saddam Hussein brought me to Iraq.
I was
At the
going to
same
ask
time we
you,
were beginning
yes.
a campaign. Yeah, and Bosnia and Northern Ireland and many places. One of the most dramatic was a few years ago when I did a concert and a prayer vigil on a hill overlooking a village in Syria held by ISIS. And that was when I got probably the best publicity of my life, when Bill Maher on his TV show called me the idiot folk singer from Portland.
How did you end up in that position? Because oftentimes you can't get in that type of an area, number one, but
Yeah.
number two, to be invited into that kind of a territory.
Well, every situation is different. Well, whenever I have had one of these peace concerts or prayer vigils, I could tell you a different story and different miracles with each one of these stories, incredible things that have happened. In the case of the Syria, we were actually on the border in the Golan Heights, which is in a Syrian area but controlled by Israel. And we had ministers and rabbis and imams, so people representing the 3 Abrahamic religions were there. And this was put together by local organizers. We had 2 buses filled with Palestinians and Israelis and Christians all coming together to this spot. And there it was. And literally, the war was going on right in front of us. You could hear the guns, you could hear the battle. But when the vigil, when the concert started, when there would be millions of people around the world who were focusing their energy and their prayers at that moment, at that spot, the war literally paused. During that whole period, there were no guns, no battles. And here's the other interesting thing. As I said, there were people all over the world who were focusing with us, and I was watching my clock so that I would know when this 15-minute period of silence would end. And I was getting ready to announce that the silence had ended when I took a breath, and before I could say anything, suddenly, apparently right below us, there was a pack of wolves, and one wolf began to howl, and then 2, and then 3, and then within seconds, this whole pack of wolves howled for 1 minute and then stopped. And that's how we knew that this vigil had taken hold. And every time we've done this, miracles have happened. 3 days later, peace negotiations, a ceasefire was negotiated in Munich. The power of this level of prayer is so incredible. So it all goes back to St. Francis. He was the one who inspired this sort of peaceful world religion movement 800 years ago. And here we are just now beginning to understand the power of such a movement and using it to make a vast impact on these situations.
So is there some type of prayer of intercession that is used? Is how does the the how does this inspiration come? Because I've got to tell you, when you're talking about this, I'm absolutely getting chills thinking about when you say that 15 minutes of silence. What I am thinking is how incredible at that moment the sound of silence, when we talk about the sound of silence, really is. Because for people who live in that environment, that is very profound.
Yeah. Well, what we always ask people to do in a situation like that, wherever they are in the world, to stop for 15 minutes and to feel that peace already prevails in Syria or Iraq or wherever it is that we're focusing. Here, there's a big difference between a prayer of trying to remember what the right word is, when you're asking for peace. Like if I'm praying for peace in Syria, for example, uh,
Okay.
the first place where my mind is that peace is not there. And my energy and the prayer is the energy itself, not the words. The energy is going to, this is a war. We need to bring peace there. And that does not have as much impact as when we get millions or thousands of people together and ask them to feel or to imagine that peace already prevails in Iraq, in Syria, or wherever it may be. And when you get people together, creating that energy, feeling that it's already there, regardless of what it looks like, regardless of what it says in the news, I'm going to feel that it's already there. That is the highest level of prayer. So it's not about saying something. We don't give a prayer out and say, just say this prayer, because words alone do nothing. It's the energy behind the words that are the prayer. And the
Okay.
feeling that the prayer has already been answered is the most powerful prayer.
You know, that's really interesting that you say that, feeling that the prayer has been answered, because oftentimes that is where the question of faith comes in. People say, well, how do you know? And someone says, well, I have faith. And that really kind of answers that question about faith, because if you already feel that that's going to be answered, then there's a knowing.
And it is. In fact, let me just tell you one story of, so you can get an idea of just how powerful this is. And I could tell you many stories, but here's one. So I have two dear friends, Greg Braden and Doreen Virtue. And back in, I think, 1999, we did a series of these prayer vigils, primarily around the situation in Iraq. This is before the second time we went in, and Saddam Hussein was still in power, and they were beginning, he was kicking out the UN inspectors, and things were looking bad. It was looking like the war could start again at any moment. And all the aircraft carriers were in the Gulf. President Clinton was under pressure to go ahead and invade again. So we called one of these prayer vigils. And Greg and Doreen and I were in different places. I was actually on the border of Iraq for that. And what happened was we called everyone together to pray and to hold this energy, just as we're describing. And we felt something shift. You can really feel it when it happens. But we didn't know what happened until the next morning. And what we
Okay.
discovered was at the same time, there were millions of people holding this vibration, this prayer. President Clinton had given the order for the bombing to begin. And so the aircraft carrier launched all of its fighter jets. They were hovering in the air, waiting to drop their weapons, drop their bombs. And no one knows to this day what happened, but why he did this. But President Clinton twice gave stand down orders and called the jets back to the ship. And at least that night, while there were millions of people holding that vibration, it was as if the war could not happen. No one died, no bombs fell. And you could say, well, it was a coincidence. Well, maybe it was, but it's happened so many times. I just don't believe in coincidences
I don't
anymore.
either.
I believe that this is not only a powerful force, but I believe that when thousands and large groups of people, even millions of people, come together and they activate this level of prayer, I believe it's the most powerful force in the universe.
So what's interesting is that you're taking this on the road, and there is going to be an instrument of prayer because there is a lot of people that are going to, and with your music, chime in on this with what you're doing, because they're going to be following and praying along the way for your safety and for people to also become instruments with what you're doing and for what change is going to be making in not only our society with what's going on around with what you have going. There's a lot more to this, and I know that you have some things in mind as well.
Well, this whole tour is going to be a supreme act of surrender and trust. And I have to say that doing this musical has been the most fun thing I think I've ever done. And I've done a lot of fun things in my life. I've had a lot of great adventures. But traveling around as St. Francis has been the greatest of them all. In fact, I should say that if people want, they can see the first 20 minutes of the musical right now, because I was recently in Assisi, where I performed it 3 times, and it was shot by a video crew, and we have the first 20 minutes online. So maybe I can give the website, and they can go to Jimmy Twyman, TWYMAN.com, jimmytwyman.com. And you'll see a link right there at the top that says get more information on the musical. That will take you to a page where you can watch the first 20 minutes. Also, make sure that you sign up for our newsletter so we can keep you abreast of what's happening on the tour. I'll be sending out videos, and I'll be sending out announcements and pictures from the tour to let people know where we are, what's going on. And of course, if you're in any of those cities, you can see the schedule. If you're in any of those cities, as you said before, I'll list them again. We start off in Portland on January 4th, and then we're going to be at the Mission in Santa Barbara, which I'm very excited about. And then Phoenix, Sedona, Santa Fe, Taos. We just added Taos. We'll be at Unity Village in Kansas City, St. Louis, Peoria. I'll tell you about. Hello? So an amazing miracle happened. When I was young, my family moved around a lot, and we spent 3 years living in Peoria, Illinois. I went to grade school there, Catholic church, Catholic grade school. And then we left, we moved to Michigan, and then ultimately to Minnesota, where my family still is. And a short while ago, I received a phone call from the pastor of a Catholic church in central Illinois, saying that he heard about this musical. It's a Franciscan parish, and they have a year-long celebration going on marking the 40th anniversary of when the Franciscans took over this parish. And they would love if I could come through on my tour and do the musical there. Well, you're not going to believe this, but it was my former parish, Holy Family Parish in Peoria, Illinois, where I went to grade school, where I was an altar boy, where I had my confirmation, all of these things. And now they're calling me back, inviting me to come back as St. Francis. So if that isn't a miracle and just shows the power of this Franciscan vision, I don't know what does. So if you're on any of those, in any of those cities or in the area or in New York, that's going to be really something.
Yes.
In fact, as you mentioned at the beginning, in New York, we're doing something no Broadway show has ever done, which is every day we're going to be on the streets passing out free tickets to the homeless. My goal is to have the audience half filled with people from the streets, because this is what Francis would do.
I love
So
it.
I hope you guys can join us.
I love it. Thank you so much for what you're doing. This is such an exciting thing, and I really hope that I get a chance to see you. I think with you being in Kansas City, I will have an opportunity uh, to get up there to see you there, and possibly maybe. Well, we'll have to check this out. I'll be following what you're doing. I also want to make sure that the audience has an opportunity to check out your new novel as well. So can you share with us a little bit about where they can get a copy of that as well?
Well, you can get the book anywhere, Amazon or bookstores. You may have to order it at a bookstore, but of course, Amazon and all the online places will have it. The book is called Giovanni and the Camino of St. Francis. So many people are familiar with the Camino de Santiago in Spain, but this is another Camino in Italy that follows the little paths and small roads that Francis himself would have walked 800 years ago as he traveled from village to village. And there's a guidebook, and you can follow those trails all the way to Assisi. I've done it quite a few times now with different groups. I like to bring a group there every year. And a number of years ago, I was walking the Camino of St. Francis and began to play with this idea of a story about a woman named Anna who has had a pretty tough life and decides to try and heal her life by walking the Camino, even though she doesn't believe in God or St. Francis. And she meets a young Italian guy named Giovanni, who becomes her Camino partner. And slowly, through his example, she begins to heal her life. And it's a beautiful story. I have to say, of all the books I've written, this one is right up there as one of my favorites. It's a new modern way of telling the story of St. Francis, but in a very, very unique context through the story of this woman, Anna. So once again, you can get that book pretty much anywhere. And I said I was not going to write another book, but when I had this one in my mind, it just wouldn't let me go until I finally sat down and began writing.
Well, that's because it was also some part of what you needed to play out as being an instrument. I want to thank you so much for being with us today. We're certainly excited to see what is going to be taking you from being penniless to traveling these ways.
Yeah, well,
Tell us a little bit
it's
about
just,
this.
these are my little Francis and Claire dolls, you can see, by the way. We're going to be bringing these on tour so people can take one with them if they want. I live in Mexico, I think I mentioned that, and we have a beautiful community here called Namaste Lake Chapala. We have 40 houses or apartments. They're always filled with people who are just so dedicated. And I can actually hear them singing down below me. And we had some wonderful Mexican ladies make us these dolls, which we'll have on tour. And by the way, Claire, we need to say something about her, because Claire never really gets her due. She is as important to this story as Francis was, but she was a cloistered nun, so we don't hear as much about her, but her life and her example was just as important and just as powerful. So Claire needs to be mentioned. Francis, traveling across the country as St. Francis is going to be probably the greatest gift and maybe even challenge of my life. But I hope you guys can come and see us, myself and my friend Bill Free. And yeah, I'm just so happy to be able to share this with you on the program.
I am too. I am very excited, and I am very excited to share that with the audience because I really love getting Christ's message out there. I love to be able to really give the audience and especially my guest platform to be able to really get the message out like you're doing. This is unlike anything that I've ever known anybody to do.
Yeah,
And I'm excited.
that's probably true.
Mhm. As you're going, I would like to be able to follow what you're doing, and hopefully I'll catch what you're doing not only from your website, but I'd like to get this on the show as you're going. So don't be surprised if you see some things here on the show. and or on the Celebre Media VIP LLC website, because this is really important information to get out there. So thank you for your time today.
Beautiful.
I
Yeah.
wish you not only the best of luck from my heart, but also my prayers will be with you and my
Thank
thoughts
you.
as well.
Thank you. Hope to see you out in Kansas City.
Absolutely. I'm really excited about this. And one more time before I let you go, if you'll give out the website.
Sure. It's Jimmy Twyman .com, jimmytwyman.com. That's where, and then there's a link right there at the top that'll take you to the site about the musical. Or you can just go to stfrancismusical.com, stfrancismusical.com. And if you want, maybe I could just play us out with one more song from the musical.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is one of my favorites. It's a song called Simple, which I think really shows who Francis was. Be like a child today. Don't overcomplicate what is simple. Yeah, so simple. Love's power, you is strong. You don't need to wait so long. It's simple. Oh, so simple. I do believe that you can finally see what I tried to get you to understand. It isn't hard to see what has always been true. If you take my hand, just take my hand. Be like a child today.
Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Oh, that's so beautiful. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in to another episode of Rebecca Sounds Reveille. Make sure you take an opportunity to find out what's going on with James Twyman and his novel, the musical, everything he's got going on the road. If you get an opportunity to go and see him live, this is something that you want to do. Make sure that you send out all of your prayers. And also, if you see him in person and he's going there penniless, get out those no plane tickets, but train tickets
Yeah.
and everything else.
Or buy us an energy bar or something.
Yes. Food, transportation, get him where he's going to the next, because he has some dates to be there for these musicals and we don't want to keep him stranded in some location. And I know that the Lord is with him. So thanks for tuning
Absolutely.
in. Share this with your friends, your family, your colleagues, everybody you know on social media. And like I say every time, everybody that you don't. And click like on all of the social medias. Um, just get it out there. Get this message out there. This is really an important episode. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.